The Clash of Civilizations and the Remaking of World Order by Samuel Phillips Huntington.
Part 3: The Emerging Order of Civilizations. Chapter 6: The Cultural Reconfiguration of Global Politics. Groping for Groupings: The Politics of Identity. Spurred by modernization, global politics is being reconfigured along cultural lines. Peoples and countries with similar cultures are coming together. People and countries with different cultures are coming apart. Alignments defined by ideology and superpower relations are giving way to alignments defined by culture and civilization. Political boundaries increasingly are redrawn to coincide with cultural ones: ethnic, religious, and civilizational. Cultural communities are replacing Cold War blocs, and the fault lines between civilizations are becoming the central lines of conflict in global politics. During the Cold War, a country could be non aligned, as many were, or it could, as some did, change its alignment from one side to another. The leaders of a country could make these choices in terms of their perceptions of their security interests, their calculations of the balance of power, and their ideological preferences. In the New World, however, cultural identity is the central factor shaping the country's associations and antagonisms. While a country could avoid Cold War alignment, it cannot lack an identity. The question, which side are you on, has been replaced by the much more fundamental one, who are you? Every state has to have an answer. That answer, its cultural identity, defines the state's place in world politics, its friends and its enemies. The 1990s have seen the eruption of global identity crisis. Almost everywhere one looks, people have been asking, who are we? Where do we belong? And who is not us? These questions are central not only to peoples attempting to forge new nation states, as in the former Yugoslavia, but also much more generally. In the mid 1990s, the countries where questions of national identity were actively debated included, among others, Algeria, Canada, China, Germany, Great Britain, India, Iran, Japan, Mexico, Morocco, Russia, South Africa, Syria, Tunisia, Turkey, Ukraine, and the United States. Identity issues are, of course, particularly intense in cleft countries that have sizable groups of people from different civilizations. In coping with identity crisis, what counts for people are blood and belief, faith and family. People rally to those with similar ancestry, religion, language, values, and institutions, and distance themselves from those with different ones. In Europe, Austria, Finland, and Sweden, culturally part of the West, had to be divorced from the West and neutral during the Cold War. They are now able to join their cultural kin in the European Union. The Catholic and Protestant countries in the former Warsaw Pact, Poland, Hungary, the Czech Republic, and Slovakia, are moving toward membership in the Union and in NATO, and the Baltic states are in line behind them. The European powers make it clear that they do not want a Muslim state. Turkey, in the European Union, and are not happy about having a second Muslim state, Bosnia, on the European continent. In the north,
The end of the Soviet Union stimulates the emergence of new and old patterns of association among the Baltic republics, and between them, Sweden and Finland. Sweden's Prime Minister pointedly reminds Russia that the Baltic republics are a part of Sweden's near abroad and that Sweden could not be neutral in the event of Russian aggression against them. Similar realignments occur in the Balkans. During the Cold War, Greece and Turkey were in NATO, Bulgaria and Romania were in the Warsaw Pact. Yugoslavia was non aligned, and Albania was in an isolated, sometime associate of Communist China. Now, these Cold War alignments are giving way to civilizational ones rooted in Islam and Orthodoxy. Balkan leaders talk of crystallizing a Greek Serb Bulgarian Orthodox alliance. The Balkan Wars, Greece's Prime Minister alleges, have brought to the surface the resonance of Orthodox ties. This is a bond. It was dormant, but with the developments in the Balkans, it is taking on some real substance. In a very fluid world, people are seeking identity and security. People are looking for roots and connections to defend themselves against the unknown. These views are echoed by the leader of the principal opposition party in Serbia. The situation in southeastern Europe will soon require the formation of a new Balkan alliance of Orthodox countries, including Serbia, Bulgaria, and Greece, in order to resist the encroachment of Islam. Looking northward, Orthodox Serbia and Romania cooperate closely in dealing with their common problems with the Catholic Hungary. With the disappearance of the Soviet threat, the unnatural alliance between Greece and Turkey becomes essentially meaningless, as conflicts intensify between them over the Aegean Sea. Cyprus, their military balance, their roles in NATO and the European Union, and their relations with the United States. Turkey reasserts its role as the protector of the Balkan Muslims and provides supports to Bosnia. In the former Yugoslavia, Russia backs Orthodox Serbia. Germany promotes Catholic Croatia. Muslim countries rally to the support of the Bosnian government, and the Serbs fight Croatians, Bosnian Muslims, and Albanian Muslims. Overall, the Balkans have once again been balkanized along the religious lines. Two axes are emerging, as Misha Glenny observed. One dressed in the garb of Eastern Orthodoxy, one veiled in Islamic raiment. And the possibility exists of an ever greater struggle for influence between the Belgrade Athens axis and the Albanian Turkish alliance. Meanwhile, in the former Soviet Union, Orthodox Belarus, Moldova, and Ukraine gravitate toward Russia, and Armenians and Azeris fight each other, while their Russian and Turkish kin attempt both to support them and to contain the conflict. The Russian army fights Muslim fundamentalists in Tajikistan and Muslim nationalists in Chechnya. The Muslim former Soviet republics work to develop various forms of economic and political associations among themselves and to expand their ties with their Muslim neighbors, while Turkey, Iran, and Saudi Arabia devote great efforts to cultivating relations with the new states. In the subcontinent, India and Pakistan remain at loggerheads over Kashmir, and the military balance between them. Fighting in Kashmir intensifies, and within India, new conflicts arise between Muslim and Hindu fundamentalists. In East Asia, home to the people of 6 different civilizations, arms build up, gain momentum, and territorial disputes come to the fore. the three lesser Chinas, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Singapore, and the overseas Chinese communities in Southeast Asia become increasingly oriented toward, involved in, and dependent on the mainland. The two Koreas move hesitatingly and but meaningfully toward unification. The relations in Southeast Asian states between Muslims on the one hand and Chinese and Christians on the other become increasingly tense and at times violent. In Latin America, economic associations, Mercosur, the Andean Pact, the Tripartite Pact, Mexico, Colombia, Venezuela, the Central American Common Market take on a new life, reaffirming the point demonstrated most graphically by the European Union that economic integration proceeds faster and further when it is based on cultural commonality. At the same time, the United States and Canada attempt to absorb Mexico into the North American free trade area in a process whose long term success depends largely on the ability of Mexico to redefine itself culturally from Latin American to North American. With the end of the Cold War order, countries throughout the world began developing new and reinvigorating old antagonisms and affiliations. They have been groping for groupings, and they are finding those groupings with countries of similar culture and the same civilization. Politicians invoke the and publics identify with greater cultural communities that transcend nation state boundaries, including Greater Serbia, Greater China, Greater Turkey, Greater Hungary, Greater Croatia, Greater Azerbaijan, Greater Russia, Greater Albania, Greater Iran, and Greater Uzbekistan. Will political and economic alignments always coincide with those of culture and civilization? Of course not. Balance of power considerations will at times lead to cross civilizational alliances, as they did when Francis I joined with the Ottomans against the Habsburgs. In addition, patterns of association formed to serve the purposes of states in one era will persist into a new era. They are, however, likely to become weaker and less meaningful and to be adapted to serve the purposes of the new age. Greece and Turkey will undoubtedly remain members of NATO, but their ties to other NATO states are likely to attenuate. So, also are the alliances of the United States with Japan and Korea, its de facto alliance with Israel, and its security ties with Pakistan. Multi civilizational international organizations like ASEAN could face increasing difficulty in maintaining their coherence. Countries such as India and Pakistan, partners of different superpowers during the Cold War, now redefine their interests and seek new associations reflecting the realities of cultural politics. African countries, which were dependent on Western support designed to counter Soviet influence, look increasingly to South Africa for leadership and succor. Why should cultural commonality facilitate cooperation and cohesion among people and cultural differences promote cleavages and conflicts? First, everyone has multiple identities which may compete with or reinforce each other. Kinship, occupational, cultural, institutional, territorial, educational, partisan, ideological, and others. Identifications along one dimension may clash with those along a different dimension. In a classic case, the German workers in 1914 had to choose between their class identification with the international proletariat and their national identification with the German people and empire. In the contemporary world, cultural identification is dramatically increasing in importance compared to other dimensions of identity. Along any single dimension, identity is usually most meaningful at the immediate face to face level. Narrower identities, however, do not necessarily conflict with broader ones. A military officer can identify institutionally with his company, regiment, division, and service. Similarly, a person can identify culturally with his or her clan, ethnic group, nationality, religion, and civilization. The increased salience of cultural identity at lower levels may well reinforce its salience at higher levels. As Burke suggested, the love to the whole is not extinguished by this subordinate partiality. To be attached to the subdivision, to love the little platoon we belong to in society, is the first principle, the germ, as it were, of public affections. In a world where culture counts the platoons are tribes and ethnic groups, the regiments are nations and the armies are civilizations. The increased extent to which people throughout the world differentiate themselves along cultural lines means that conflicts between cultural groups are increasingly important. Civilizations are the broadest cultural entities. Hence, conflicts between groups from different civilizations become central to global politics. Second, the increased salience of cultural identity is in large part, as is argued in chapters 3 and 4, the result of social economic modernization at the individual level, where dislocation and alienation create the need for more meaningful identities, and at the societal level, where the enhanced capabilities and power of non Western societies stimulate the revitalization of indigenous identities and culture. Third, identity at any level, personal, tribal, racial, civilizational, can only be defined in relation to an other, a different person, tribe, race, or civilization. Historically, relations between states or other entities of the same civilization have differed from relations between states or entities of different civilizations. Separate codes governed behavior towards those who are like us and the barbarians who are not. The rules of nations of Christendom for dealing with each other were different from those for dealing with the Turks and other heathens. Muslims acted differently towards those of Dar al Islam and those of Dar al Harb. The Chinese treated Chinese foreigners and non Chinese foreigners in separate ways. The civilizational us and the extra civilizational them is a constant in human history. These differences in intra and extra civilizational behavior stem from number one, feelings of superiority and occasionally inferiority toward people who are perceived as being very different. Number two, fear of and lack of trust in such people. Number three, difficulty of communication with them as a result of differences in language and what is considered civil behavior. Number four, lack of familiarity with the assumptions, motivations, social relationships, and social practices of other people. In today's world, improvements in transportation and communication have produced more frequent, more intense, more symmetrical, and more inclusive interactions among people of different civilizations. As a result, their civilizational identities become increasingly salient. The French, Germans, Belgians, and Dutch increasingly think of themselves as Europeans. Middle East Muslims identify with and rally to support in support of Bosnians and Chechens. Chinese throughout East Asia identify their interests with those of the mainland. Russians identify with and provide support to Serbs and other Orthodox peoples. These broader levels of civilizational identity mean deeper consciousness of civilizational differences and of the need to protect what distinguishes them from us. Fourth, the sources of conflict between states and groups from different civilizations are, in large measure, those which have always generated conflict between groups. Control of people, territory, wealth, and resources, and relative power, that is, the ability to impose one's own values, culture, and institutions on another group, as compared to that group's ability to do that to you. Conflict between cultural groups, however, may also involve cultural issues. Differences in secular ideology between Marxist Leninism and liberal democracy can at least be debated, if not resolved. Differences in material interest can be negotiated and often settled by compromise in a way cultural issues cannot. Hindus and Muslims are unlikely to resolve the issue of whether a temple or a mosque should be built at Ayodhya by building both, or neither, or a syncretic building that is both a mosque and a temple. Nor can what might seem to be a straightforward territorial question between Albanian Muslims and Orthodox Serbs concerning Kosovo or between Jews and Arabs concerning Jerusalem be easily settled, since each place has deep historical, cultural, and emotional meanings to both peoples. Similarly, neither French authorities nor Muslim parents are likely to accept a compromise which would allow schoolgirls to wear Muslim dress every day during the school year. Cultural questions like these involve a yes or no, zero sum choice. Fifth and final is the ubiquity of conflict. It is human to hate. For self definition and motivation, people need enemies. Competitors in business, rivals in achievement, opponents in politics. They naturally distrust and see as threats those who are different and have the capability to harm them. The resolution of one conflict and the disappearance of one enemy generate personal, social, and political forces that give rise to new ones. The us versus them tendency is, as Ali Mazrui said, in the political arena almost universal. In the contemporary world, the them is more and more likely to be people from different civilization. The end of the Cold War has not ended conflict but has rather given rise to new identities rooted in culture and to new patterns of conflict among groups from different cultures, which at the broadest level are civilizations. Simultaneously, common culture also encourages cooperation among states and groups which share that culture, which can be seen in the emerging patterns of regional association among countries, particularly in the economic arena. Culture and economic cooperation. The early 1990s heard much talk of regionalism and the regionalization of world politics. Regional conflicts replaced the global conflict on the world's security agenda. Major powers such as Russia, China, and the United States, as well as the secondary powers such as Sweden and Turkey, redefined their security interests in explicitly regional terms. Trade within regions expanded faster than trade between regions, and many foresaw the emergence of regional economic blocs, European, North American, East Asian, and perhaps others. The term regionalism, however, does not adequately describe what was happening. Regions are geographical, not political or cultural entities. As with the Balkans or the Middle East, they may be driven by inter and intra civilization conflict. Regions are a basis for cooperation among states only to the extent that geography coincides with culture. Divorce from culture, propinquity does not yield commonality and may foster just the reverse. Military alliances and economic associations require cooperation among their members. Cooperation depends on trust, and trust most easily springs from common values and culture. As a result, while age and purpose also play a role, the overall effectiveness of regional organizations generally varies inversely with the civilizational diversity of their membership. By and large, single civilization organizations do more things and are more successful than multi civilizational organizations. This is true of both political and security organizations on the one hand and economic organizations on the other. The success of NATO has resulted in large part from its being the central security organization of Western countries with common values and philosophical assumptions. The Western European Union is the product of a common European culture. The Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, on the other hand, includes countries from at least three civilizations with quite different values and interests, which pose major obstacles to the developing a significant institutional identity and a wide range of important activities. The single civilization Caribbean community, CARICOM, composed of 13 English speaking former British colonies, has created an extensive variety of cooperative arrangements with more intensive cooperation among some subgroups. Efforts to create broader Caribbean organizations bridging the Anglo Hispanic fault line in the Caribbean have, however, consistently failed. Similarly, the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, formed in 1985 and including seven Hindu, Muslim, and Buddhist states, have been almost totally ineffectual, even to the point of not being able to hold meetings. The relation of culture to regionalism is clearly evident with respect to economic integration. From least to most integrated, the four recognized levels of economic association among countries are: number 1, free trade area; number 2, customs union; number 3, common market; number 4, economic union. The European Union has moved furthest down the integration road with the common market and many elements of an economic union. The relatively homogeneous Mercosur and the Andean Pact countries in 1994 were in the process of establishing customs union. In Asia, the multi-civilizational ASEAN only in 1992 began to move towards development of a free trade area. Other multi-civilizational economic organizations lagged further behind. In 1995, with the marginal exception of NAFTA, no such organization had created a free trade area, much less any more extensive form of economic integration. In Western Europe and Latin America, civilizational commonality fosters cooperation and regional organization. Western Europeans and Latin Americans know they have much in common. 5 civilizations, 6 if Russia is included, exist in East Asia. East Asia, consequently, is the test case for developing meaningful organizations not rooted in common civilization. As of early 1990s, no security organization or multilateral military alliance comparable to NATO existed in East Asia. One multi-civilizational regional organization, ASEAN, had been created in 1967 with one Sinic, one Buddhist, one Christian, and two Muslim member states, all of which confronted active challenges from communist insurgencies and potential ones from North Vietnam and China.